Muito bom dia. Eu sou Lindy, secretária de extensão da UADEM Brasil. Sejam todos muito bem-vindos a este novo webinar organizado pela UADEM Prime, filial Brasil. A Escola Internacional de Negócios, com 28 sedes nos Estados Unidos, presente em 8 países de língua espanhola na América Latina e agora também no Brasil. É uma verdadeira honra contar com a presença de vocês hoje. Sabemos que o tempo de cada um é valioso e agradecemos profundamente por terem escolhido investir este momento para continuar se desenvolvendo conosco. Quem somos? A Wadden Prime é uma escola de negócios com visão global que oferece programas nas áreas de negócios, idiomas, tecnologia e formação profissional com diploma americano. Contamos com um respaldo acadêmico da Wadden University e com o aval institucional da Câmara de Empresários Hispânicos dos Estados Unidos, o que garante a qualidade e a projeção internacional em todos os nossos programas. Sobre o uso do Zoom, antes de começarmos, algumas orientações técnicas e de etiqueta para garantir uma experiência positiva para todos. Por favor, mantenha seus microfones desligados durante toda a apresentação para evitar interferências. Caso queiram fazer perguntas, podem escrevê-las no chat a qualquer momento. Ao final da conferência, teremos um espaço de 10 minutos dedicado exclusivamente para perguntas e respostas ao vivo. Todos os slides utilizados hoje serão enviados em formato PDF, juntamente com o certificado oficial de participação, no prazo de até 72 horas úteis, após o evento. A única contribuição que pedimos em troca é simples, mas muito valiosa: que nos enviem um breve depoimento ou avaliação sobre sua experiência no curso e sobre o conteúdo recebido. Isso nos ajuda a melhorar continuamente e a seguir oferecendo formação acessível e de qualidade para mais pessoas. Muito obrigada e vamos começar. Mais uma vez, agradeço por estarem conosco. Pedimos que se preparem para fazer anotações e participar e aproveitar ao máximo do evento. E agora, sem mais demora, passamos a palavra para o professor Lucas e a quem damos as boas-vindas mais calorosas. A palavra é sua.
Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good night to all of you. My name is Lucas James Jernigan. I'm going to give you a brief introduction of myself before we start this class. So, as I said, my name is Lucas James. I come from an American family, but also from a Brazilian family. And I've been listening to English and having English in my life since I was born, since day one until today. And I've been teaching for over 10 years, and especially to Brazilians. I have taught to a few people from overseas, but my specialty is for sure teach Brazilians. Well, today I'm going to be teaching you about cardinal and ordinal numbers. So the name of the class is Understanding Cardinal and Ordinal Numbers, but in a simple way. First of all, we have to make sure that everybody understands that numbers are a very simple topic. I said numbers because we have two types of numbers, cardinal and ordinal. Most people don't really understand the difference between them because we live a common life, common daily life, and we don't stop to think about the difference between these two types of numbers, or even that consider that both types of numbers exist. We just go on living and talking, and we don't stop to think about this difference of concepts. So, what are cardinal and ordinal numbers? Let's start by cardinal. Cardinal numbers are the most common numbers, are the normal numbers, as we would say. But saying they are normal numbers is not enough to define them or to make people understand what they really are. So, what are cardinal numbers? Cardinal numbers are the common numbers used to define quantity, or how many of objects or whatever we are talking about. So defining the cardinal numbers are actually easy. We use them to specify how many items or objects or people, or it doesn't matter what we're talking about. We just need to define how many or how much depending on what we're talking about. But as I said, this class is about keeping it simple and understanding them in a simple way. So let's make everything as simple as possible. So cardinal numbers. When we think about normal numbers, what comes to our mind? The ordinal, the common sequence of numbers. So we're going to start by counting those numbers until a certain amount, until a certain number, and also making sure we understand the most correct pronunciation possible. Because as we understand that English is a worldwide language made easy for everybody to understand, to speak, but this comes with a few consequences of having different pronunciations. So we're going to keep in mind that, at least for me, I come from an American family. So I learned and I teach the common English, as we say, standard English. But of course, there are a few differences in pronunciation, like British English or in other countries that people learn and spread the pronunciation in their ways. But we're going to keep in mind that for having a simple class today, I'm going to use the standard English pronunciation. So defining how many cardinal numbers, and let's start pronunciation and counting from 0 to, I would say, at least 50. So before I start counting and pronouncing, I would like to say to everybody to keep in mind that to learn pronunciation and to show people that you are in control of good pronunciation, we need to listen very carefully to how people pronounce, and we need to be able to copy this pronunciation as mm, as better as possible in terms of how we listen other people pronouncing. But I'm gonna touch that subject a little further in this class. Let's start counting. 0, 1, 2. And here I need to stop for a little bit because at least here in Brazil, we hear most of the people pronouncing this number with a different stress in the word. Most people say chew, but I would like to warn everybody that this is not a good pronunciation. I'm not gonna say it doesn't exist because it exists in other words and even in numbers, but for the number 2, we don't use this stress and we're gonna say two and not chew. That's the first and most common mistake and correction that I'm gonna make for everybody. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. Let's stop here for a while. So those are the unity numbers. Those are the first numbers that everybody needs to master, even though numbers are such a basic and essential topic to master. In understanding and mastering this pronunciation, the pronunciation of all these 10 numbers from 0 to 9 is essential for the continuation of the sequence of numbers. What I like to do in my classes, every time that I teach my students about pronunciation of these numbers, what I do, of course, keeping in mind that I'm used to teach Brazilians, I also I write down the right spelling, the correct spelling of each number, but I also write in a sideways column the spelling in a way of in a way that the Brazilians think, and if they would read this different spelling, they would understand easier how they should pronounce each sound, each syllable, or where the stress of the word is. Because understanding how Brazilians, most Brazilians at least, think, I was able to imagine, to create this different spelling, different and wrong in terms of the correct spelling, comparing to the correct spelling, but thinking that most Brazilians would read these words and with their natural and automatic the syllables, they would be able to understand easier how it is the correct pronunciation for each number, considering from 0 to 9. They are, let's say, the most important group. I'm gonna pronounce these 10 numbers again to make sure everybody understands the most correct and standard pronunciation. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. All right, now moving on to the second group. The second group would be from 10 to 19. I think most Brazilians understand the correct pronunciation of number 10 because it's such an easy number to pronounce. But after number 10, there comes a few numbers that, with my experience, I could notice that most of Brazilians have a hard time understanding how to pronounce them. But we're gonna make them simple. We have to understand that this group, it's an exception. After number 10, we have number 11, which has its own name, as we would say. But it's common to see when we understand a little bit of the USA, a big supermarket, as I would call it, named 7-Eleven. And 11 is one word that is part of this name. And it's easy for people to understand names of brands or places. It's easy to memorize how is the correct pronunciation. So I always use this kind of cue to make them memorize even easier. So number 10, 11, and number 12. This number is also another number that, with my experience, I can see it gives a hard time for people to memorize and pronounce correctly. And also, they make a confusion with number 20 because of the spelling. When they look at the number written, the name of the number, the word of the number, it's easy for most Brazilians to make confusion with these two numbers, and this confusion coming from the reading of the number extends to the pronunciation. But making it simple, the word, the number, the name of the number is 12. All right, now we're gonna have another group inside of this second group. Starting from the next number to the last number of this group, as I like to separate the numbers in groups to make them a little easier for everybody in all the ages to understand. This group is the teen group. In my opinion, the most important part of this group is understanding where the stress is and how to pronounce this specific and essential word. First, teen means in Portuguese adolescente. And the correct pronunciation is like this, putting the stress in the I and not extending too much this part of the number, this part of the word, and finishing the pronunciation of the word in the correct consonant, N. S, I'm gonna mention, but I imagine that most people here already know that Brazilians have a hard time, usually have a hard time to cut the word in the correct consonant and have this fad to extend the pronunciation with another vowel. But it's essential for us to keep in mind that we need to cut the pronunciation in the right consonant. We have to use the stress in the right moment. And keeping this in mind is going to make a lot easier for everybody to pronounce correctly, how to pronounce correctly all the names of these numbers inside this group, inside this teen group. Okay, let's keep counting. 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, and 19. Explaining why this stress and control in pronunciation are so important in that group. Because if we don't put the stress in the correct part of the numbers, naturally, we're going to put the stress in the wrong part of the numbers. And the stress in the wrong, the opposite part of the numbers, it's going to sound like another group of numbers, not the teen numbers. So every time that I teach this subject, I make very clear for everybody to understand it as simple as possible, that the pronunciation needs to be done correctly with the stress at the end of the number. We're not going to take the beginning of the word, the number part of the word, and we're going to put the stress in the teen part of the word, of the number, in every number in the teen group from 13 to 19. So if we put the stress in the opposite, in the beginning of the number, what is going to sound like? It's going to sound like 13. 13. You see how the beginning is very strong, 13. And that sounds like another number that I'm going to talk about a little further. And on the other hand, if we put the stress in the teen, in the ending part of the number, let's see how it's going to sound like. 13 or 13? Can everybody hear the difference clearly? 13, 13. You can even stretch the end of the number a little bit if you feel like this is going to help you to pronounce it better. So one more time, let's hear the difference of the first, the wrong pronunciation with the stress in the beginning, and after the correct pronunciation with the stress at the end of the word, of the number. 13, 13. So understanding this and copying this idea for the pronunciation is going to make sure that everybody and anybody pronounce correctly all the numbers in that group, in the teen group. So making it simple, always put the stress in the teen part of the word, of the number. 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, and lastly, 19. Can everybody hear and understand clearly how the stress makes a big role, has a big importance in how your pronunciation is going to sound like? And I believe now we can move on to another group. This group is from 20 to 29. Remember in the first group of the unity numbers that I said those were the most important numbers, most essential numbers to master and understand and pronounce correctly. Now you're going to understand why this is so important. Okay, so first, the pronunciation is 20. So, in the beginning I said number 2 has this specific pronunciation, 2. And would make sense that all the numbers starting with number 2 would have the same pronunciation. But I always heard my dad all my life pronouncing 20. And that for me is a little strange when I think rationally about it. But he's a native. He was born in the US. He spent 2/3 of his life in US. So who am I to correct him? But I want to make this clear for everybody that number 2 is always pronounced like this, 2, and 20 can be pronounced with this different pronunciation, as I always heard my dad pronouncing, 20. Okay, now we're going to combine this number 20 with all the other unity numbers except from 0. So what we do here is just put the words together, 20 and then the unity number. For example, 1, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, and 29. So now is it clear for everybody why it is so important to master the understanding and the pronunciation of the unity numbers? from 0 to 9 because they are essential for this combination. And now, the only thing we have to do is understand the pronunciation from all the decimal houses and combine and put together the unity numbers, keeping in mind that the accurate pronunciation is key not to have misunderstandings or to sound as a person who actually masters English. So let's take a look at all the decimal numbers. We started by 10, of course, and we talked about 20. So the sequence is 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, and 90. We have to keep in mind that there are different pronunciations around the world. As I said, I'm gonna use the standard English pronunciation, but there's nothing wrong with British pronunciation or pronunciation from other countries that are native English speakers, that has native English speakers. But the American English was created and developed to be easy for everybody in the world to understand and to use. So I always say that the Americans don't like the pronunciation with T, the stress in the T letter. And what we do, we change the T pronunciation for other letters, usually R or N or other letters. So for Brazilians, maybe easier to pronounce these words in this group with the T sound. But I always teach and have always taught my students with the pronunciation that I learned and that I'm more familiar with, even though it could be a little bit harder for few people. So let's listen again to the pronunciation of the numbers in this group, starting by 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, and 90. The other possible pronunciations, not in the American Standard English, but in English in general, would be 20, 30, 40, 50, which is the same as in the American English, 60, which also is the same, 70, 80, and 90. That could sound a little easy, and that could be a little easier for Brazilians to pronounce. But we have to keep in mind that there is this difference, and if you're trying to sound as an American, you need to understand one type of pronunciation. If you're trying to have a British accent, for example, you can go for the second option of pronunciation. Now that we understood what are these numbers and how to pronounce them, we only need to put them together, as I said, combine these words, these numbers, decimal numbers, and the unity numbers. The same as we did in the 20s group. So let's count them and see how they're gonna sound like. 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, 37, 38, and 39. The next group is the 40s group, starting by number 40. 40, 41, 42, 43, 44, 45, 46, 47, 48, and 49. As I said in the beginning, we would stop in number 50 because the idea of this class is to make the numbers simple to understand. And making it simple, in my opinion, is to create and understand how each group needs to be used and pronounced. And understanding that what we did in the 20s or 20s group and in the 30s group is the same of what we need to do in the 40s group, 50s, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, and 90s. Just put together, just combine the word, that the number that finishes with 0, like 20, 30, 40, 50, and so on until 90, and the unity number. I always teach Brazilians, and in Portuguese, we have to combine these two numbers, but we need to put the word and in between them. For example, 21, 22, 23. In English, we don't need to do that. We just put one number and the other number together. We don't need and. 20, 20 and 1, for example, 20 and 2. We don't need that. We just need to put both numbers together. And like this, we understand how to think about and how to pronounce the most essential numbers from 0 now, not only to 9, but to 99. Keeping in mind that we need to put those groups together and try to pronounce them as better as possible, copying, of course, the people who has the correct pronunciation. Now, we're going to move on to the bigger numbers and to the bigger groups. The next group is the 100 group. Okay, so how are we going to master the 100 group? Let's think about them for a second. First, 100 is not a number. 100 is a word that means a group of 100 objects or items. But the word 100 is not a number. And understanding this, is key to not making mistakes when using the bigger numbers. If the word 100 is not a number, so how do we use it? You need to count how many groups of hundreds you are talking about. And that's why we need to say 100 or 200, 300, 400, 500, and so on. Because the word 100 is not a number. The word number means a group of 100 objects or items. In Portuguese, there is a word cento. Cento is a common word for birthday snacks that in Brazil is cultural, that we buy in for birthday parties. We buy, for example, a box of 100 snacks, cultural fried snacks. And when we buy, when we talk to the companies selling these snacks, what is common to say is, in Portuguese, eu quero cento de salgado. And this word cento is the perfect to illustrate what 100 means, because cento is also not a number, is a word that means a group of 100. And that's why we need to say cento de salgado, or in English, 100 of snacks. And this same idea is gonna hold us for the rest of the numbers in this 100 group. So let's count. 100, 200, 300, 400, and 500. We can continue this sequence until we get to big numbers, because it is also common and cultural in USA to use the 100 group to mention bigger numbers, but I believe that in the American school system, it's very common for the students, for people to understand the numbers based in the number 10 and all the mm, and all the options related to number 10. The school system in Brazil is different, but for the Americans, it's easy to understand when somebody says, for example, 1100. In Brazil, in Portuguese, we don't say that. 11 centenas, for example. It's confusing. If we say that to somebody, people are going to look at us like, what are you talking about? Because our school system teaches us different than in US. But in US, it's very common to know the numbers based in the 100 group. But that doesn't go on to so big numbers. as far as I've seen in my life, it's common to say up to 4,500, maybe, because it's faster and simple for them. So this idea of saying 100, 200, 300, 400, 500, 600, 700, 1500, 2500, 4200, for example, it's simple for them, and people in US use this constantly in their daily lives. So for the Brazilians, it is a good thing to understand, is a good thing to master, because it is gonna make you feel a little closer to natives when you're speaking to one of them. So I know it sounds a little confusing. I know thinking about it is going to be a little confusing, but you have to keep in mind that it's only confusing for us Brazilians because we don't have this system in our school. Now that we understood the 100 group, and that is so important to number, to say the number of how many 100 groups we're talking about, we're going to move on to the next group, which is the group of the thousands. And as I said in the beginning, the idea of this class is to keep it simple. So now that we understood that the hundreds are a simple group and easy to use and pronounce, the same idea is going to be applied to the 100 group, to the 1,000 group, I'm sorry. So the first thing is to understand that 1,000 is a word, not a number. And the same way, we're going to use 1,000 in the number system, but we need to say the number of how many thousands we're talking about, because 1,000 is a group of 1,000 objects, items. And we always need to say the number of how many groups of thousands we're talking about. And the same idea is going to be applied. I know big numbers can sound confusing for a lot of people, but I promise you, you're going to see how simple it is. First rule, always remember to number how many thousands you're talking about. If it's 1,000 or 2,000 or 3,000 or 4,000 or 5,000. But we need to number how many groups of thousands we're talking about. And this group, it's a little easier because we don't have this system as we have for the hundreds. We just need to say how many thousands we're talking about, and it's good to go. So let's use the year that we're living in to give this example. The year is 2025. So just saying 1,000 is not enough. We need to say if it's 1,000 or 2,000 or 3,000 or 4 or 5,000 or 6,000 or 7,000 or 8,000 or 9 or 10,000 or 11. So now, does it make sense? Why is it so important to understand and master the unity numbers from 0 to 9 and the correct pronunciation? Because we use them in most groups. And in this 1,000 group, it's the same thing. We just need to mention, to number the number in the word 1,000. Very similar to what we have in Portuguese. But in Portuguese, it can be a little easier because the system is different and we don't need to number how many thousands in every number in the 1,000 group. For example, we have the word mil, and this word itself is a number. But when we look at the contracts or documents, it's very common to see mil, and they are also numbering how many thousands they are talking about. The same idea is going to be applied for all the numbers in the 1,000 group from 1,000 to, for example, 99,000. Let's stop in 99,000 because now we understood two very important groups, the unity groups and the groups of the decimal houses, which are all the multiplied by 10 numbers. And we understood how to put them together and to count the number until 99. And after that, we just need to count these numbers and number these numbers and put the word 1,000 with it. And we can go from 1,000 to 99,000 very easily. And now for some people, this could get a little complicated because we're going to combine the hundreds and the thousands, and we're going to start reaching way bigger numbers. But I promise you, this is going to be simple. What we need to do is to combine both groups. So let's think about a few examples. Normally, I would start using a lot of numbers in Portuguese and in English to make my students understand how simple it is to combine them. But here I'm going to just give you a few examples. The first number we're going to talk about is 100,000. If we look at the numbers, it's going to be a little intimidating because there will be a lot of zeros. But like I said, English was made and developed to sound and to be easy for everybody in the world. So it's just a matter of putting them together. 100, as we learned before, and 1,000. And that's how we combine these numbers and make the big number of 100,000. The same idea will be applied for all the other numbers. 200,000, 300,000, 400,000, 500,000, 600,000, 900,000, for example. And now, I know it's going to be a little complicated for a few people, but it's just a matter of putting them together. If you're studying with a piece of paper and you're looking at the numbers in your notebook, it's a little easier to visualize how this is going to work. But we just need to put them together. Just like we did in, for example, all the numbers until 999, we add the word thousand. 999,000. I used this example because it's the biggest example before turning into another group. So if you understand 999,000, you understand all the other words, all the other numbers. Like, for example, 450,000, or even a little bit more accurate, 465,000. And now what all the students that are willing to understand and master this topic need to do is work on it. Now it's not a matter of understanding. It's not a matter of explanation. It's not a matter of talking and making it simple. Now it's a matter of looking at the numbers and exercising them in your mind, doing a few math problems, or make this correlation between the numbers in Portuguese and in English, starting by the simple numbers, like the unity numbers from 0 to 9, until the very big numbers, like 999,000, which are the most detailed numbers that you could have in that group. And after a few days working on these numbers, exercising these numbers, making this correlation between Portuguese and English, I think, I imagine, I assume it's going to be a lot more simple to understand them. Of course, it's not so simple that you only think about it once and now you're a number master, but with a few days, a few times of practice, I'm sure you're gonna master the numbers. Always keeping in mind that a good pronunciation is done by copying people that you know have good pronunciation. Doesn't make sense to copy pronunciation from people who doesn't have a perfect pronunciation, because you will learn wrongly for sure. And you're gonna be speaking in a wrong way, and you're gonna teach people in a wrong way, and that's gonna just continue the cycle of mispronouncing English by Brazilians. As we all know, it's very common. Well, we understood the most essential groups from 0 to 9, from 10 to 19, and another inside group from 13 to 19, and all the numbers that are multiple of 10, that are multiplied by 10, like 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, and so on until 90. And we understood the group of the 100, and now the group of the 1,000. And how to combine all these groups together. Now, it's just a matter of understanding and pronouncing the following groups, like million, billion, and trillion, and so on, even though those numbers are a lot more rare, a lot more uncommon to see in a daily life, depending on how big they are. But the idea is the same. Just put the groups together, put the numbers together, keep an eye for the correct pronunciation. I know million and billion is written with O, the letter O, but it is pronounced with a sound, million, billion. No American says million, billion with O sound. It's always a sound. So pay attention to that, pronounce correctly, put the numbers together, combine them, and you're good to go. Now that we did the counting and the sequence of all the numbers, let's move on with our class. So, as I said, cardinal numbers, which are the normal numbers, they define how many items, objects you're talking about, and we use them for counting and for quantity. So, as we can read here, they are used for counting objects, for quantities, and for amounts. They are essential for fundamental numerical communication. And this sentence is very important because a lot of students, a lot of people, they tend to want to master more advanced topics, and they sometimes they can do that. They can speak well, they can pronounce well, they can understand more advanced topics, but they make mistake in cardinal numbers. It just doesn't sound good and expose a flaw that no people would like to have, especially people who are trying to show that they master more advanced topics. Doesn't make sense to master an advanced topic and make mistakes in a basic topic like numbers. So they are essential for fundamental numerical communication. And we have a few examples here, and they are 1, 2, 3, 10, and 100. Those are a few common cardinal numbers. And here I have a few examples of cardinal numbers in use in a couple sentences. So the first example here, she has 4 bags. So we're counting. How many bags does she have? She has 4. She has 4 bags. And the second example here, there are 30 students in the classroom. Now we're talking about a bigger number, but as we've seen, it's a simple number to understand. There are 30 students in the classroom. So we're talking about the quantity of students in the classroom. We're counting how many there are. how many students there are. And in this example of classroom, there are 30. And now the third example. He is 10 years old. This example is very easy to understand. Even the Brazilian that never had an English lesson in his life probably knows number 10. So this number is very easy to pronounce correctly, to understand, and to memorize its meaning. So he's 10 years old. Now is not the quantity, but we're counting how many years old he is. And it's not 1 year old, 2 or 3 year old. He's 10 years old. And for the last example here of a more specific number, our company has 26 offices worldwide. So now we're counting how many offices does our company have worldwide? Our company has 26 offices worldwide. So those are 4 examples of cardinal numbers in sentences. Not only thinking about the number themselves, but putting them in sentences, in common regular sentences, to understand these numbers in use. She has 4 bags. There are 30 students in the classroom. He is 10 years old. And lastly, our company has 26 offices worldwide. I believe we have talked about all the possibilities of cardinal numbers. What are they? What they mean? How we use them? And talked about all the possibilities, the exceptions in pronunciations, the importance of pronunciation. And now it's simple to understand how we put them together and don't make mistakes pronouncing these words, pronouncing these numbers. Also, as I said, all the students need to work on these numbers. All the students need to exercise these numbers using their notebooks, a piece of paper to illustrate the number. They need to read how the number is correctly written so they know how to write down the numbers in a correct way. And I also talked about what I personally do with my students, my Brazilian students, that is a cue to an easier pronunciation and to memorize the correct spelling of the numbers and the pronunciation. I also write down in a Brazilian way of pronouncing. So I created different names, different words for the numbers, different spelling for the numbers that would fit in most of Brazilians' minds. So they would read these numbers written in a wrong way, but in a way that they would read and with the idea of the sound and the syllable that they have in their minds, they put together and they understand a little easier how to pronounce the names of the numbers. All right, moving on. If we understood that the cardinal numbers are the common numbers, the simple numbers that everybody knows, so what are the ordinal numbers? Because, like I said in the very beginning, most people don't even know that there are two types of numbers. They just go on speaking and don't stop to consider that there are two types of numbers. And most people don't stop to study them. So we need to understand what are the ordinal numbers. So for the word cardinal, I don't know any link to the word cardinal and the meaning of cardinal. Not personally. I don't know it, being honest. But for the ordinal numbers, there is the word order. In order, everybody knows what it is. And when we think about order, it's like what comes first, second, third, and this sequence. So understanding this is key to understand what are ordinal numbers. Because when we think about this order, I imagine a line of people, for example, to use the bank or whatever. So imagine a line of people. Who is the number one person in the line? And who is the number two person in the line? And who is the number three person in the line? And how do we correctly talk about them? So, to understand ordinal numbers, think about line at first. Let's see in this first rectangle here, what is it written about the ordinal numbers? Position and order. So, position and order. If we have position and order to consider, it becomes a little easier to start understanding what are ordinal numbers. Ordinal numbers, they indicate the position or order of something in a sequence. So in this line, the number one person is going to be the first person. The number two person is going to be the second person. And the number three person is going to be the third person in this line, in this sequence. So we could understand very easily now, very simply, that ordinal numbers are used in position and order, ranking and sequence. This is gonna make sense in a while. They are used, the ordinal numbers, they are used to describe the rank, the placement, or the order of items in a series. So rank, placement, and order. Sequence, position. Okay, now it starts to make a little bit more sense. What ordinal numbers actually mean. Let's talk about a few examples, a few more examples. Like I said, first person in line, second person in line, and third person in line. As in the cardinal numbers, for the ordinal numbers, we're gonna separate them, split them in groups. So now that we understood what are they, let's understand what groups are they. So ordinal numbers are actually a lot easier than cardinal numbers, but we need a few settings to understand them in a simple way. What settings are they? Okay, so first you need to have mastered the cardinal numbers and the correct pronunciation. This is key. If you don't know cardinal numbers, there is no way you're gonna learn ordinal numbers. So also the pronunciation here is most important than ever, because these words, unfortunately, they are a little bit more complicated to pronounce for Brazilians due to not being used frequently, not being seen or heard frequently, and due to having specific sounds that we don't have in Portuguese. But even though being a little bit more complicated than the cardinal numbers, ordinal numbers are easier because there are less things to understand, so you can master the ordinal numbers. Let's split them in groups. The groups here will finish in specific numbers. The first group will be of basically all the numbers ending in number 1. So let's understand them and hear a few examples of numbers, of ordinal numbers ending in 1. 1 is the first number. Instead of saying 1, we need to say first. And there is the correct spelling, there is the correct pronunciation. First. Now, we're going to skip number 11 because 11 is part of the exception that we have here. And we're going to move on to the next number ending in 1, which is the number 21. So for the ordinal numbers, instead of saying 21, we're going to replace the number 1 for 2, for the word 2. And we're going to say 21st. So we have first, we have 21st, and we're going to continue the sequence using all the groups that we used, that we learned when we were talking about cardinal numbers. So first, 21st, 31st, not 31. Following the sequence, 41st, not 41. 51st, 61st, 71st, 81st, 91st. So we only need to understand that we need to use the word first in the place of the number 1, or in other words, replace number 1 for or with the word first. The beginning part of the number, which is, for example, 20, 30, 40, is going to remain the same. The only change will be the ending part, which is the number 1 for the word first. Again, first, and we're going to skip 11, and we're going to move on to 21st, 31st, 41st, 51st, 61st, 71st, 81st, and 91st. But ordinal numbers are not common to be used for big numbers, except, for example, in tests that government apply, and we have a list of a lot of candidates, for example, but it's a little rare to find situations that we use big ordinal numbers, but they exist and you need to master them. And what I'm doing here is showing you how simple they are to be mastered. Even though it could sound confusing, but it's actually simple. It's just a matter of understanding how to pronounce them correctly, what words you're going to use, and where or when you're going to use these words. So, moving on to the second group. If the first group was the group ending with number 1, naturally, the second group is the group ending with number 2. Instead of number 2, we're going to use the word second. And keep an eye for the correct pronunciation. I know it writes with O, it spells with O, but we're not going to pronounce second, as most Brazilians would imagine reading the word. We're going to use, again, the sound and we're going to pronounce second. So, from number 2 to second. Second, we're going to skip the next number ending with 2, the same as we did with 11, we're going to do with 12. And we're going to skip this number because it's part of the exception. And we're going to move on to the next number ending with 2 in the sequence, which is 22. But in ordinal numbers, we should say 22nd. And following the sequence, 32nd, 42nd, 52nd, 60-second, 70-second, 80-second, and 90-second. I believe this sounds very simple because we could see that the first group was very simple, so now it's even more simple to understand the second group. Which leads us to the third group, which naturally is related to number 3. And instead of saying or using the number 3, we're going to use the word third. And again, I know it writes with the letter I. I know the word is spelled with the letter I, but one more time, we're going to use the sound and we're going to say third. And taking a look at the sequence, the same as we did with number 1 group, number 2 group, and we're doing with number 3 group, we're gonna use the word third to take a look at them. Third, we're gonna start by. And we're gonna skip the next number ending with number 3 because it's also part of the same exception. And we're gonna move on to the next word, to the next number ending with the number 3. And as we did in the first and in the second group, we're just going to replace the number 3 by the word third. And let's take a look at how those numbers are going to sound. Third, 23rd, 33rd, 43rd, 53rd, 63rd, 73rd, 83rd, and 93rd. Of course, as I said, it's very rare to see big numbers, big ordinal numbers, but they are not impossible. They are not inexistent. They exist, even though they are a little bit more uncommon. And everybody needs to master these numbers so they can master both cardinal and ordinal numbers, and then move on to more complicated, more advanced topics. So now we have seen the idea of ordinal numbers and how to pronounce them correctly. First, second, and third. Which leads us to the last group. The last group, it's also simple, but at the same time, a little bit more complex because it takes all the rest of the numbers, ending with 0 and until 4. Or, as I would say, the opposite, because we understood numbers ending with 1, 2, and 3. Now this next group takes the numbers ending from 4 to 0. So, for example, like number 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. And the same goes for all the decimal houses. But why is this group so big? Because it takes all the rest of the numbers. There are only 4 groups for the ordinal numbers. First group, second group, the third group, and the TH group. TH is the most complicated group, for sure, for Brazilians. First, because of pronunciation. Americans, they grew up with the TH pronunciation, and it sounds very natural. It sounds very easy. But Brazilians don't have this sound in our language. So takes more time to understand how this group works, how the pronunciation works, how all your system is going to produce this sound. Taking a brief moment to explain how to make the TH sound. TH sound, it is simple, but takes practice. So how is it simple? It's simple because you're going to take the tip of your tongue and you're going to put in the back of your upper teeth and you're going to press your tongue to the teeth, but not so strong that the air cannot flow, and not so gentle that doesn't produce any sound. It needs to be touching, but also gentle to allow this air to go through. And I know it's complicated for some people, but you have to keep in mind that you need to practice. This is something that you weren't born with, and you need to work for it to master this pronunciation, to master this sound. And the sound itself is going to sound like just like a blow of air. If I press too much, the air is not going to flow. If I don't press with enough strength, it's not going to sound like anything. It's just going to sound like air. So you need to put your tongue like here, press it, but gently, and allow the air to go through. And this soft song, as I soft tongue from that I learned from my dad, is, in my opinion, key for the Brazilians to start mastering the TH sound, which is essential for this group of ordinal numbers. So, assuming that most people mastered or at least practiced and exercised the TH sound, the students will need to be able to put them in the numbers, in the words of the numbers, in the name of the numbers, as we would say. So, how is this group so big? Let's start by considering all numbers ending with number 4. Instead of using number 4, we're gonna use the word far. And I said slowly, I pronounced slowly to be easier for everybody to understand, but in reality, it doesn't have this separation. We just say fourth a little quickly, like this. But if you don't know, if you can't pronounce the TH correctly, you're just gonna sound like the cardinal number 4. Fourth, fourth. You know, it's a difference that most people, especially native, they understand very easily. And it is something that you will want to pronounce correctly, for sure. So I know it's going to be complicated, but take your time, work on it, exercise it, and master the TH pronunciation. Because not only for ordinal numbers, but for a lot of other words in English, the TH sound is going to be very important. But in ordinal numbers, let's take a look at the numbers ending with number 4 and the ordinal option, how the ordinal option is going to sound like. Fourth, now there's no exception. We're going to include the next number ending in 4. But the number is actually named 14. And we're just going to take the word, the number 14, and add the TH sound, 14th. And then moving on to the next following numbers ending with 4, we're going to have 24th, 34th, 44th, 54th, 64th, 74th, 84th, and 94th. Now, numbers ending with 5. Number 5 has a little trick on it. Remember that from 5 we went to 15 and not 15. Now this is going to be useful. We're going to have the pronunciation as fifth, and then there is no more exception, 15th, and the following numbers ending with 5. 25th, not 5, 25th, 35th, 45th, 55th. I know it sounds a little confusing, but 55th, 65th, 75th, 85th, 95th. And let's move on to see how the other numbers are going to sound like. Numbers ending with 6. Number 6 itself is going to be sixth. I know it sounds a little confusing, but we have the X sound, 6, plus the TH sound, sixth. So combining them together and pronouncing a little quicker, sixth, sixth. Work on it to master a good pronunciation. There's no more exception. So 16th, 26th, 27th, 36th, 46th, 56th, 66th, 76th, 86th, and 96th. And those are all the numbers ending with 6, and in the ordinal way, 6. We're going to follow the same idea for numbers ending with 7. 7th, 17th, 27th, 37th, 47th, 57th, 77th, 87th, and 97th. As I said, this class is gonna make all the numbers simple. So we're just gonna follow the same pattern and go to number 8. 8 already sounds with the T sound. So we're gonna replace the T by TH and say, pronounce 8. Not 8 and then the TH sound. No, we're gonna replace T by the TH sound. 8th, 18th, 28th, 38th, 48th, 58th, 68th, 78th, 88th, and 98th. And the same pattern for number 9. For the number 9, we're going to pronounce 9th. And of course, I'm pronouncing a little slowlier for people to understand perfectly. So 9th, 19th, 29th, 39th, 49th, 59th, 69th, 79th, 89th, and 99th. And now this leads us to the numbers ending with 0, because if you remember, I told you this group of numbers take the numbers from 4 to 0. And why did I say 4 to 0? Because we have number 10, for example, and we say 10th. Number 20, 20th. 30, 30th. 40th, 50th, 60th, 70th, 80th, and 90th. And just to give you an idea of the bigger numbers, 100, 100, putting it together, 100. I know it's a little complicated, but Brazilian people needs to work on this subject. We need to exercise this, needs to master the pronunciation to sound natural as the native do when they're talking about cardinal and ordinal numbers. So I think, oh, I was forgetting the group of the exception. We have 11, 12, and 13 that are numbers ending with 1, 2, and 3, but they are not part of the groups of numbers ending with 1, 2, and 3. Why? Because the numbers themselves, they have their own names. We don't say 10, 1, like we say 21. We say 11. We don't say 10, 2 or 10, 3, like we would say for 21, 22, 23. They have their own names, 11, 12, and 13. So they are part of the TH group because they have their own names. And 11 is going to be 11th. 12, it's a little tricky because we have a rule of F and V in English. And the cardinal number 12, it doesn't end with the letter V, but it ends with the V sound. And when it comes to ordinal numbers, instead of V, we're going to have F in the sound, in the pronunciation, and also in the spelling, in the writing of the number. And number 12 is going to be 12th with F. So it's not 12, it's 12th, 12th. And the last exception number is the number 13 that ends with number 3, but as the number has its own name, we're going to use the th for this number as well. So 13, 13th. And now I think it's very clear why it is so important to master the th sound to understand the numbers and mostly to have the most accurate or the best accurate pronunciation possible. Now, let's take a look at a few examples of ordinal numbers. Remember in the beginning of the explanation that I said ordinal numbers were for lines, sequence, ranks. The same for podiums, as we see in competitions, as we see, for example, in the Olympic Games, as we see in video games also. We see this podium and we see this sequence: first, second, and third. But so we don't need to use these big words to mention the ordinal numbers. We have this format, this abbreviation format that we can use, and is most common to be seen in the use of ordinal numbers. So for all the numbers ending with first, we're going to have the number itself, but following with the last letters of the word first, which are ST. So it's going to be like 1 ST, representing first. The same thing we're going to have for second, which are the last two letters of the word second, ND. So that's what we're going to use. The number 2 itself and ND. And the same goes for third. Third ends with RD. So we're going to use the number 3 plus the letters RD to have this other format and way more simple. And like I said, the TH group, it's auto-explanatory here. It doesn't have a specific word, so we're just going to take these two letters, TH, and put at the end of all the numbers ending from 4 to 0, and also the exceptions, 11, 12, and 13. Those are all the numbers that are going to have TH at the end. So now let's take a look at these 4 examples of ordinal numbers in use. I am in the 5th grade. They finished 6th in the race. Today is August 12th. And the last example here, the meeting is on the 2nd floor. So now, what are the key differences between cardinal and ordinal numbers? Now that we have talked about them, we have explained, we have a lot of examples, we have worked on them. The key differences between cardinal and ordinal numbers are, for cardinal, we focus on quantity, in how many of the groups of the items that are. And for ordinal numbers, they indicate the position of which one object you're talking about. Ordinal numbers often end with suffixes like, I just told you, ST, ND, RD, and TH. And it's important to emphasize that you need to pay close attention to the pronunciation, especially the TH sound, which is crucial for clear communication in English, not only, as I said, in ordinal numbers, but also for other words in English. So let's take a look at the common ordinal number rules and exceptions. So, like it says here, these are unique. They must be memorized. The first, second, and third words. Also, the TH when it comes to the rest of the numbers, not ending with 1, 2, and 3. So we have this suffix rule for numbers ending in 1, 2, and 3 are most common to be seen with the number itself and also ST, ND, and RD. Like I mentioned, the exceptions are number 11, 12, and 13 because as they have their own name, they end with th, making them sound 11th, 12th, and 13th. And most important, the th rule. All the numbers from ending from 4 to 0, like I said, for example, like 4th, 20th, and 100th, they consistently take the th suffix. And now I put here an exercise, a small quiz to help students use these words and numbers in the correct way, and for the teachers to check how accurate the students are in their answers. So we have this interactive quiz. Choose the correct number form. Test your understanding of cardinal and ordinal numbers. Number one, she has 5 or 5th projects to complete. So she has these projects to complete. Okay, let's give you a moment to think about them, and we're gonna move on to the following numbers of this exercise, and then we're gonna see the correct results. Number 2, today is the 3rd or 3 of August. I'm gonna give you a moment to think about them. Number 3, our office is on the 2nd or the 2 floor. And number 4, there are 20 or 20th employees in the meeting. Let's think about them for a second and take a look at the answers. For the number 1, for the first option, the correct answer is 5 because we use cardinal numbers for quantity. She has 5 projects. We're counting how many projects she has. So she has 5 projects. Number 2 is 3rd because we use ordinal numbers for day. As we've seen in one example back there, we have another example here. Today is the 3rd of August. And not 3 is the 3rd day of August. That's the idea. For number 3, The correct is second, because we also use ordinal numbers for position. So our office is on the second floor, not on the two floor, is on the second. And the last one, number four, is 20, because we use cardinal numbers again for quantity. We're counting how many employees, so there are 20 employees. And understanding the context helps to determine whether to use cardinal or ordinal numbers. So if you understand the context, if you understand if it's being talked about quantity or order, position, then it's gonna be a lot easier or a lot more simple to understand which kind of number do you need to use. And so here we have a conclusion. Why? Why mastering these numbers are so important? Like I said in the beginning, most people don't even know two types of numbers exist. But so why then is important to master this kind of numbers? First, it is important to master them for clear communication. It is essential. Mastering those numbers are essential, is essential for precise quantity and order in business. You don't want to make mistakes in business, not with numbers at least. Accurate dates. We always use ordinal numbers for dates. In Brazil, in Portuguese, is different. So we have a different system for dates, but in English is not the opposite, but there is a different sequence. Like we always say the month first, we say the day second, and the year lastly. But when we say the day, we shouldn't use the cardinal number for day. We should use the ordinal numbers. And it's very important to master these two topics for global navigation. Because, as it says here, you avoid miscommunication, especially with US street naming. I personally have a couple of students that in 2020, they traveled to New York and they had a very hard time explaining to taxi drivers or understanding the map system when it comes to ask to other people directions or situations like this, and they needed to pronounce the ordinal numbers for the names of the streets. And in that moment, I realized the importance of mastering the good pronunciation, not only mastering the idea of how ordinal numbers work, but mastering the pronunciation. Because if you're thinking correctly in your mind, the name of an avenue, for example, but when you talk to a taxi driver, you mispronounce the name, the number, the ordinal number, but is the name of the avenue, for example, you're gonna have a hard time, or you will need to write down the name of the word, the name of the street, the avenue. But gives you a different sensation of power when you know people understand when you talk. And this is why it's so important to master ordinal numbers when you're traveling around the world, especially in US. And lastly, it's a fundamental skill. So mastering basics strengthens your foundation for advanced topics. As I mentioned before, it's so strange to listen to people that have a control of more advanced topics, but when they talk about numbers, dates, or when they use numbers or any other basic topic, you see that this person is making a lot of mistakes in pronunciation and in the understanding of the numbers. So my suggestion is a strong suggestion for all the students to master the fundamental skills, to master the basics before wanting to go to master more advanced topics in English. And that's how I conclude my class. I hope I achieved my goal of making also both cardinal and ordinal numbers very simple, because I know there are a lot of things to consider. There are big numbers and there are a few rules that people need to keep in mind. But in the end, English is made to be very simple, worldwide, and with this explanation, I hope you all could understand how simple cardinal and ordinal numbers are. And thank you so much.